I'm good on my side. Ruby, are you good on your side?
Yep, I think so.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. And I'm gonna turn the time over to Ruby as soon as I can. I wanted to just show you the self-compassion workbook again. I can't tell you how many times I've heard how many times I've heard women tell me that this has helped them, and I know it's helped me. I'm so grateful that self-compassion was introduced to my life, and it's made a big difference. And I'm just really happy to share it with all of you. And I love hearing the feedback that it brings more compassion into your life. So let me know if you have any questions. You can use the chat bar at the bottom. If you don't want to unmute yourself and speak up, you can always use that chat bar. But validation is something that I have been really, really excited to talk to Ruby about. As I've studied it the last couple of months, I think I've just been blown away. I didn't realize how important validation was until I started researching it and I started studying it. And I realized that I look for validation in a lot of other places. I look to my husband for validation a lot. I look to just outside sources for my validation. And I didn't need to do that. I can actually validate myself. And as I have been validating myself the last couple of months, it's been awesome. And I really believe that it's the key to self-compassion. I believe that validation is why self-compassion works so well, is because you're validating yourself and you're giving yourself compassion. But I've seen it work wonders with my kids and with my husband as we've avoided arguments, as I have been able to validate him in different scenarios. Then he's able to calm down a little bit, and he's teachable. So I'm just really excited for Ruby to teach us all about it, because I think it has a big impact on us. So Ruby, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you. And yeah, I've liked your compassion workbook too, because it's really the most compassionate thing you can give yourself is to validate yourself. I mean, before I, started learning about validation myself and having compassion for myself, I thought self-care was all about getting your hair colored and all about, if I was having a hard time with the kids, or, a spat with a spouse, it would be like, well, I need to go out shopping. Brittany, you know that as well as anyone, because you were my shopping partner there for.
You're a great shopping buddy.
Because I wasn't finding that self-compassion for myself, because I wasn't validating myself, I thought that self-care looked like shopping, and it can be. I just didn't have the proper placing for it. And so I'm really thrilled to get to talk about validation today and kind of dig a little deeper into what that means. So I'm going to share my screen here and go into, I made a little PowerPoint, but I want to make sure you can still see my face. Can you guys still see me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so a lot of what I've gotten from today and where I've learned about validation has come from Connections Classroom. Jody Hildebrandt runs Connections Classroom, and she has a lot of resources that I have found helpful. I am in the women's group, which is like a group therapy session. She has workbooks and parenting classes. If you go to her podcast, I have a little screenshot of what her podcast looks like. And she talks about validation and invalidation, and it is probably the best podcast in terms of being most useful to me. I know you would just love it. Brittany, I think you've listened to this one as well.
Yeah, I think this was the one that got me started thinking about validation, where I was like, whoa, validation is so huge. I had no idea. So then this is what got the ball rolling for me, and I started researching it otherwise. I love Jody's podcast.
Yeah, and when I first started hearing this, the words that she was using were quite shocking. She's, it's like, what is the most inhumane thing you can do to a person? And I'm thinking, you know, I'm thinking my mind goes to World War II whenever I think of inhumane. And really at the crutch, at the seedling of all that garbage that was dealt with during World War II, it all comes down to invalidation. When you tell someone their truth is not their truth, when you tell someone their identity is not their identity, when you tell someone that their experience is not real, that's invalidating, and it is completely inhumane. Okay, so I have to tell you, when I was in elementary school, I had the hardest time remembering multiplication. I still have a hard time reading things and then remembering them. And there was one class where I learned we were on multiples of zero, or multiplication with zero, and it was like, you mean to tell me anything multiplied by zero is zero? And the teacher's like, yes. I'm like, what? This is a lesson I'm going to remember. I said, okay, so if like 1 billion gazillion kabillion subtract 42,000 divided by 52.567 to the second degree times zero is zero. And she's like, yes. I'm like, I'm the most genius person in the world. Like, I use that trick at home. I'm sure my parents just like loved me using that. So what I want to talk about today is how validation really is that magic number. It is this magic formula that is so soothing every time it's used. It is, no matter how complicated your situation is, no matter how simple your situation is, validation is going to have a place. And it doesn't matter if you are talking with, an aging parent who's got dementia. It doesn't matter if you're working with a little 2-year-old who is, learning to communicate. No matter the subject, validation is needed. So it's a great tool to have. Validation is a need, just like we need air, we need water, we need food and shelter. Those are all things that keep us physically alive. Validation is what's going to keep us emotionally alive. It's what's going to help keep that spark in our eyes. I know we've all probably been there ourselves, and I think we've all seen other moms, and you just look at them and you're like, oh, I can see that this is a person who is needing that light is gone out of their eyes. There is this longing, there's this like need that's not being met. And if you add validation, you're going to start seeing some of that spark come back. You're going to start seeing some of that emotional energy come back. If you're really struggling through depression, if you're struggling with anxiety, validation is key to getting yourself balanced. So what is validation? Validation is acknowledging someone's perception. It is saying, hey, I see you and I hear you and I understand you. When we read in the scriptures about charity, it's really how God sees somebody, loving someone the way God loves them. And so when I am speaking to someone and I want to give validation to you, I'm going to speak to you as if I were seeing you the way God sees you. And I think that where this gets difficult is when we're speaking to ourselves. Because when I speak to you, I'm using verbal, I'm using these physical cues, I'm really trying to connect with you audibly, visually. And so all of these go through my senses, these checks. And when I'm talking to myself, I could be talking to myself unconsciously, subconsciously, and I'm not really even checking what messages I'm sending myself. And if I'm not conscious and I'm not aware of what I'm saying to myself, how I'm speaking to me, I can forget that I am seeing myself in a way that God doesn't see me. Like if I think, sometimes when I think, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, I'm so dumb, I know God would never say that. I'm going to close this door really quick. My kids are all walking in the house from a walk. Okay, so I like visuals, and validation is not it's not a guarantee of anything. It's not going to all of a sudden make all of your problems go away. I like to think of it as like the gel coating on medicine. So when you take medicine, the gel coating isn't going to alter the medication. Your medication is still going to work exactly how it was intended. It's just when you add that gel coating, it just goes down so much easier. I took what was it? Was in an it wasn't Advil, or was it Advil? It tasted like candy. I'd never had it before. I usually take Tylenol. It doesn't taste that great. But this Advil had this coating on it, and it tasted like candy. And it was so much easier to take. And so what we're all looking for a healthier life emotionally is to have reality, to see things in truth. When we have truth, our spirits connect with it, and we go, oh yes. And the truth can be difficult. It takes a lot of humility to see ourselves in truth. And so I would say the more truth you're taking in, you're going to need very large doses of validation to help that. So what if a person's perception is off? How do I validate my husband when he's had wrong, or when his perception is skewed? How do you validate a person? So this is a little recap of what Paige did a seminar a couple months ago, and she talked about how all of us have experience. Every day we have thousands of experiences. We're having an experience right now where we're on a computer. Now, you can be having this experience in truth or distortion. So the truth is that I'm sitting on a chair and I'm talking to you, and I'm doing it through Zoom, and Brittany invited me. All of those things are truthful. If I'm not careful, I can go into distortion, and I could go into denigrating, which would be, I am so scared that what I'm going to say is going to be boring, or gosh, this is so nerve-wracking. I feel like everyone hates what I'm saying. Or I could have this experience in an adulating form of distortion, which would be, I know everything and they should totally listen to me because I'm smarter than everybody. So those are two examples of what this experience could look like in distortion for me. So our perceptions are really important. Our perceptions are what are going to lead us to the emotions that we have. So I'm trying very hard to stay in truth around this experience, which is helping me to stay calm and centered. So I had this experience. The reason I have a red little house and a green little house is because I want to share this experience that I had with my husband. We were building a shed in the backyard, and my husband had said, hey, Ruby, you're going to need to pick out some colors for our shed. They're going to need those colors so they can get the paint ready when they come next week. And he gave me a date. We need to have the colors by the 10th. And so I had made a date in my calendar. I was going to go out on the 9th to a paint store and get some paint swatches. And as I was walking out the door, my husband said, "Hey, where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm running off to the paint store. I'm going to grab some samples to make sure I've got the colors that I want for the shed." And he said, "Oh, you don't need to worry about that. I already have the shed colors." And I said, "What?" and I went into complete distortion. I went into adulating, and I was so angry. I said, "You can't even tell the difference between red and green. What were you thinking picking out the shed colors? You're colorblind. How do you even know what's going to go with the house?" And I was just angry, and I was completely out of truth. And so you can see how I could have had this fire between my husband and I going. And fortunately, after yelling at him that what was he thinking, and you're colorblind, why would you do that? And the meaning I was putting on it was, you must not love me because you picked out the colors for the shed, you know better. And as I caught myself, I realized, okay, just stop. Ruby, just stop and give some validation. And so I stopped and I said, "Okay, listen, you were trying to help me. Is that where you were going? You were trying to help me, weren't you?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, you had a lot on your plate and you've been busy." And I said, "Oh, I see. That makes so much more sense. You were trying to do something for me. You weren't trying to tell me how much you hate me by picking these colors." And validation is a great way to go back when you have said something you regret, to go back and start with, "Hey, I totally missed what your perception in this was. Is this probably what was going on, or will you share with me your perception?" So the word "and," okay, here's the formula that I like to work with. So I validated Kevin's emotion. I said, "You were trying to help me, and you saw that I was busy, and you stepped up and tried to take something off of my plate." And he said, "Yeah, that was my motive. I was trying to be a good husband. I didn't want to be a bad husband. I was trying to, let you know I love you. I wasn't trying to tell you I hate you." So validating the emotion. And then I said, I am really sorry I jumped at you. I was not being very fair to what you were trying to do. And I still want to pick the colors for the shed. And so it was this invitation into my reality that I really don't want to spend the money and have Kevin pick out the colors. And when I saw the colors he picked out, they really were terrible. They were not at all going to work with the house. But not having that validation would have been just so abrupt and so like a lot to swallow. And of course, I presented it in the most rough way. So, okay, so what validation can look like. I took a lot of these from connections, but some ideas are, "I can see why you would feel that way," or "I appreciate your situation. It sounds really difficult and challenging." It's important to remember to do this with yourself. So like number 5, "I can understand why I feel this way." Brittany and I, before this started, we were talking about how much validation we as mothers need to be giving ourselves, because we've been with our kids and our schedules have been up in the air since March. It feels like it's been summer vacation for so long, and yet we still have how much longer of this? Like a month and a half. And I don't even know what the fall is going to look like. Like maybe my kids are going to be home for another year. I have no idea. And so I need to say, of course I'm feeling frustrated. It makes so much sense why I would feel out of control, because really my situation is out of my control. Skipping down to number 9, when I was talking to my husband, one thing I could say is there anything I'm missing? Am I really understanding you? Or what else do you need me to know so that I can really support you? Try to repeat if you're talking to someone and they're sharing something with you. It's great to say, okay, let me make sure I understand this, and then do a recap and feedback everything you heard, and then say, am I missing anything? Is this accurate? So I'm going into a lot of examples outside of myself, because I think it's so much easier to understand validation outside of myself and then apply it to me. So we were planting flowers as a family yesterday, or a couple days ago, and I heard a squabble from some of my children. Child 1 started yelling at child 2 and saying, you're supposed to plant the marigold and then the petunia and then the marigold, and you just planted 2 marigolds together. You're doing it all wrong. And so child 1 is just like blaming and persecuting and causing all kinds of invitations into drama. And then child number 2 went into complete victim, started crying. I can't do anything right. I'm just too little. I can't plant flowers very good. And it was like this, it was just this drama. So I've got the drama triangle here. This has been around for quite a while. So I've got child 1 who's blaming, and then I have child 2 who's going into victim, saying, I don't deserve this. This shouldn't be happening. I'm just too little to do a good job. And then I wanted to jump in as the controller. I wanted to jump in and say, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to rescue my victim. I'm going to make you all feel better. This is supposed to be a really fun family experience, and you guys need to just knock it off. And so there's no validation in that. And this is where I jump in a lot. This has been where I've had to really practice, is because it feels really good to jump in and say, I'm going to fix this and make you feel better. And that's missing, that's skipping validation. So validation is really how you're going to exit out of drama. Validation is how you're going to enter into connection. So what I did was I knew I was going to be teaching this, so it was a good reminder to like experiment with it and try. I'm still really experimenting with this. It does take a lot of practice. And I said to child 1, I said, I can see that this experience planting flowers has been super important to you. You have been so helpful. You stayed with me and picked the flowers. You went to the shed and you got all of the shovels. You have not complained once about planting the flowers. You've been super hardworking, and I don't think I could have done this without you. And then I said to child number 2, who was crying, I said, it must be really hard to want to do a good job and to be told that you're not doing it right. And you thought all along that you were just doing the best you could. And so I didn't take sides, and I didn't try to fix it, but I just tried to see my child, each of them, for what they were feeling and for what they were experiencing, and trying to say, hey, look, I see what you're doing, and I see how you could be frustrated that you had all these plans and you're wanting to control how this looks. And I can see how child number 2, how this is really upsetting for you to be told that this is not good enough. And when you're little, you probably feel like you're being told you're not good enough a lot. And both of them just kind of took a breath as they're listening to, when you're given validation, it's kind of like getting a back rub. You just kind of stop. Like, have you ever tried this with a kid who's just out of control, to just gently walk up to him and just start rubbing their shoulders? It's like magic. They're just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna stop crying. I'm just gonna feel this for a minute. It's like they go almost kind of dumb. like it feels so good. And so as I was heaping tons of validation on child number 1 and child number 2, like I could just see how good it felt to them, and they just wanted more of it. And so at that point, this is where I go back to this formula. I validated their emotion, and then I said, and I am going to finish this project all by myself if this continues. So when you're validating, it doesn't mean that you become a doormat and you allow child number 1 to take over. It doesn't mean that you allow child number 2 to stay in victim. You're going to hold boundaries, and because validation is going to be your tool, you don't have to become the controller anymore. So to this drama triangle, I can choose validation, which goes over so much better. It's like taking that pill with the gel coating, or I can go into control. And I have found it takes a lot more consciousness to remember to choose validation. It doesn't come natural, I think, I don't know. Becky, I think it comes pretty natural to you. I don't know. Have you practiced that, or has it always been natural to you?
I think it's been a natural thing, but there's always going to be a triggering space, I think, for most people, where there are certain personalities that are harder to validate, or certain conflict relationships. So overall validation has come really natural, but I have certain relationships that I have to be more conscious to validate, because I feel triggered, and that trigger's about me. But those are the ones I have to be really conscious with.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I think there are, and you might find that the person that's the hardest to validate could be yourself. The hardest person to validate could be your spouse, or children, or your mother-in-law. There's always a relationship that seems very difficult to validate. And so that's why it's important to know that you don't have to validate. You're not validating the action. You're not saying what is going on is okay, but you're validating the emotion. Does anyone have an experience where they've been in this drama and would like some help being walked through what that would look like to get out of this using validation? Or does anyone have an experience that they found successful, or that they would like some help with?
I'll share one while everybody's thinking. I had one just yesterday with my kids. My third, Clara, was writing little invitations to all of her friends, and just like little note cards. And she got mad at my 3-year-old, and he had a card that he had written a P on for his name. And anyway, she tore it all up. And my 9-year-old saw her, and so he went over and tore up her cards because he was like, that was so mean of you. And so then he starts ripping up her cards. So then she runs downstairs, and he had just cleaned the playroom because he was getting ready for some friends to come over. She goes downstairs and destroys the playroom to get back at him. So I come out, I've been in the shower or something, and I come out and see all of this drama going on, and everybody's crying and everybody's mad at somebody. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I took a second and I validated everybody. I validated my 6-year-old and said, you've been working really hard on those little invitations or those little notes. Like, you've been sitting there, your hands have been getting tired. Like, you've been putting a lot of effort into that, and you've been really excited to give those to your friends. And it must feel really terrible to have your brother rip them up, because that was all your hard work. And she was like, yeah, and she's crying, you know. And then I turned to my 9-year-old and I said, like, you were trying to protect your little brother, right? Like, that wasn't nice of Clara to rip up his card, and so you were trying to protect him, and that was a great big brother thing to do, that you were standing up for him. And he said, yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to do. And then I used the word and I said, and that was not okay what you did to go rip up Clara's notes. And Clara, and that was not okay for you to go mess up the playroom to get revenge. And so now there will be consequences for what you did. And so they both got extra chores, and they had to apologize to each other. But it got us out of drama almost instantly. As soon as I said, that must feel terrible, they were like, yeah, it does. Like, just to have somebody hear them and see them, instead of me just running out and being like, what's going on? You guys are terrible. Just go to your room or go fix it, or, you know, whatever I would normally do. Instead, just to have that second of pause and be like, okay, you must be feeling this way, you must be feeling that way. It was like that back rub you were talking about. It just instantly diffused it and went down, and they still got their consequences. And I feel like validation is what makes people teachable. If people aren't validated, they're not in a teachable state. They're not in a state where they are willing to learn. And I feel like this is the case in all of our society right now with Black Lives Matter and everything. People just want to be seen, and they just want to be heard. And once they are seen and they are heard, like, oh, okay, now I'm willing to listen. Now I'm ready to learn, or whatever the case is. So I love this drama triangle. Will you forward me these slides? I would love to put together an email and send it out to everybody who's here in case they want it later on.
Yeah. I think you make a really great point, Brittany, because invalidation, I think, is so easy to overlook, or sorry, validation is easy to overlook. And you think that you can just kind of sweep it under the rug, or you think like, oh, I'm just going to ignore this. I'm going to let this slide. Oh, I'm going to pick my battles. I'm going to let this go. It's really easy to minimize. But if you get into the habit of really minimizing and not looking at drama, and really just seeing the reality of what's going on, and you try to cover it up or distract from it, you know, hey, let's all just make some cards together. Hey, I've got more cards. Let's, you know, and oh, I'm going to help you clean up the room that she made a mess of, you know, and just try to keep things happy and joyful all the time. It's going to build up. And I think what we're seeing in society is a lot of buildup over time, over decades, over centuries, that has come to a boiling point. And so it's important for all of us to keep in mind our own emotions, because we're responsible for our own thoughts, our own emotions, and our own choices. And so validation is how that's going to come out. And we'll get to that in a moment, you know, how that works, how that happens. But so how do I know if I am getting enough validation? How do I know if I'm being validated, or how do I know if I'm really hungry for validation? This is where your emotions, it's really important to be awake and aware to what you're feeling. So if I am in a relationship where I'm getting sufficient validation, I'm going to feel safe. I am going to feel like, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable, you know, with my spouse. I know I can go to my spouse and tell him, hey, you know, I jumped at you with those colors and I am embarrassed that I flew off the handle. And my experience has told me that he's a safe place to go to because he's going to listen to me. He's not going to roll over. He might tell me something that's really hard to hear. He might say, you know, you jumping at me like that over paint colors is really disturbing, and I am really upset over it. And I feel like, you know, however that affected him, he might share that with me, and I might, yeah, sit through that and listen to, you know, how that's affected him. And it takes a lot of humility to do that. But if there's validation in the relationship, there's going to be that back and forth, learning from each other. You're going to have open and transparent relationships. You're going to feel connection, and you're going to feel peace and calm. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, just because you have validation in a relationship doesn't mean there's going to be no pain. I feel like, and it's taken a while to get there, but I feel like my husband and I have a really good working of validating each other. And there's still so much pain in our relationship because I'm still, you know, say things and I go, oh, why did I say that? Oh, I was not thinking. And he'll still say things and he'll go, you know, I was really snippy and grumpy, and that is not how I want to be, and I'm really sorry. So there's still, it's not perfect. So validating is not perfection, not at all. Okay, so if you are short on validation, you're going to feel detached. So, you know, when I went flying off the handle with the paint colors and the shed, if I was validation hungry, wasn't getting enough of it, or he wasn't, then I would probably feel like hiding and not bringing it up. I would be scared to talk to my spouse about it. You're going to have hidden agendas or things you just don't talk about. You just don't talk about that to each other, or you don't bring it up. You're going to have some numbness where, you know, I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know what I'm feeling. You know, whatever. That's kind of numbness. Whatever. I don't care. Or I'm so laid back. Yeah, I know you yelled at me, and you know, what's new? That's kind of what it looks like to have numbness in your relationship. Okay, so addictions. All addictions are going to be born out of invalidation. Or if you can take any addiction, and if you follow it down, and if you really get to the root of it, you're going to find invalidation. Addictions can be anything from nail biting, overeating, undereating, pulling out eyelashes, shouting. So that was a big one for me. When I was not getting enough, when I was not validating myself, I would jump into shouting because it gave me this illusion that I was in control of my household again. When really my household didn't need my shouting. My household needed me to see each person. My household needed me to understand others' perceptions. So, you know, chronic sleeping, shopping, sex, porn, gossip, all of those are forms of addiction. So if any of those are present in your life, if you're involved in something that you are impulsively going back to over and over again, take a look at how you're doing with validation. Are you getting the validation that you feel you need? Are you feeling seen? Are you feeling understood? Are you feeling heard? Okay, so this is my last slide, and then hopefully you guys have thought of a few things that maybe we can talk about. So who is responsible for me getting validation? If it is like water and shelter and food, then who's ultimately responsible for feeding me? Who's ultimately responsible for giving me water? It would be me. So, you know, my husband could offer me water. That would be kind of him, but that's not his responsibility to give me water. And you know, it's really kind of my daughter to bring me a sandwich if she knows I've been working, and that would be an offering, a gift from her. But ultimately, it's my responsibility to feed myself. It's not my daughter's responsibility to feed me. And so I am responsible to validate myself or to find that validation. So one example of an experience that I had where I needed a lot of validation, and it was something that I wasn't able to just do on my own. I needed outside help. That was when I had a miscarriage about halfway through a pregnancy. And I was so lost and so confused, and I was feeling like my whole world just flipped upside down, and I wasn't sure how to go about it. It was tempting to go hide. And I had this experience where I went to church one Sunday. It was after I had felt comfortable going back to church. It'd been maybe 2 or 3 weeks since I'd been. And the Relief Society president came over, and she said, "I'm so glad to see you. How are you?" And I said, I'm, and I was honest with her. I said, "I feel very lost." And she said, "Well, don't worry. I'm not going to tell anybody in Relief Society. Your secret is safe with me." And I thought about that for just a second. She had assumed she knew what I needed and what I wanted. And so I advocated for myself. I said, "Oh, am I supposed to keep this a secret? Was this supposed to not be talked about?" And she was kind of taken off guard a little bit. And I said, I would love to talk about this. You know, if you wanted to share in Relief Society that I'm going through something hard, I'm open to that. And she was like, "Oh, okay." And what that did was it opened up many people who were able to come offer me validation. If I had kept it quiet and hidden, and I'm not sure, I think everyone handles things a little differently, but for me, I really wanted people to know so they could offer me condolences. I wanted that. I wanted people to be able to know I was going through something hard. I really did appreciate the plates of cookies at the door. It really meant a lot to me. And so by telling her, "I need you to tell the Relief Society that this is going on," it was my way of making sure I got validation met, because in that experience, I think my husband wanted to jump in and make me feel better, and it wasn't validation. I think that was, yeah. So, and if you're looking for validation and you don't get it from one place,
Ruby,
yes.
before, like, can I just cheer you on that?
Oh,
Like, seriously, that is so, I love when and I've also been society president, wondering, because knowing everyone, some people may want it quiet, some people may not, and trying hard not to assume, and how wonderful it is when you speak for you, you can be better supported. So it's advocating for you, and it also helps the other person know. It's so clear and so wonderful. So I just want to cheer you on. That was awesome.
Oh, thanks, Becky. It's not the most comfortable. Seeking out validation, I think if you're not used to it, it can feel almost selfish. It can feel almost like you're trying to take attention. And it's not.
That's how distortion enters in there. It's really easy because it's vulnerable. And that vulnerability, and also culture, we get confused with seeking validation and being arrogant or conceited. And I really think it's blurred for kids, at a certain age, it starts being blurred. I think when you're little, they just say it. And somewhere in, later elementary and junior high, it's really blurred. And also I think in also church culture, it can be seen as arrogant or, wanting attention, like you said, needy. And I think the message needs to be changed because all of us need it. And we get to speak up on what feels, different ways to express how it feels good to you. So that's all.
Yeah, I think, I love how you brought up kids. Kids naturally know how to get validation when they're really little. I mean, if you've ever watched a kid who scrapes his knee at a family reunion, this kid will go to mom, and mom like, oh, I'm talking to grandma. And then he'll go to uncle. I had this experience. We were at a family reunion, and my brother, there's a river that went all around the property, and my brother had gotten in the water and he wanted help to get out, and he was screaming, and my mom's like, he's got a life jacket on, he's fine, totally invalidated him. And then my dad was like, just jump off on the other side, like totally invalid. And he was like, finally, after going through 5 people and screaming, he got my uncle to jump into the river and pull him out. He was in a life vest. But kids will go from person to person to person until they find someone who'll be like, oh, you do have an owie on your knee, you poor thing, let me kiss it better. And then they're like, oh, that's what they needed. They just needed validation. They didn't even need a Band-Aid. They just needed someone to see them, to understand them, to validate them. And then they're fine. Then they're off playing and, off with cousins again. So if you find someone who doesn't validate you, then what I like to tell myself is, okay, I asked my husband for validation around this and he wasn't available to give it to me. Okay, who else could I go ask? I can call Brittany. I can call Becky. I can, bring this up in a group therapy session. I can talk to a neighbor. I can find someone who can validate me. And yeah.
Ruby, I think I've learned a lot lately just about how powerful it feels to validate myself too, where my husband is not in tune with feelings or emotions of anybody around him. And so as I have looked to him for validation for so long, we've been married for 13 years now, and I'm like, when are you going to validate me? You should just know. I've learned 2 things. One is I can just ask for it, and then he's happy. He's like, oh yeah, whatever. And then, usually he's happy to validate me. It's not because he has wanted to invalidate me. It's just because his mind has been somewhere else. And it's really that simple. And so just like you talk to your Relief Society president, we can just ask for it. there's nothing wrong with asking for it. The other thing that I've learned is that I can also validate myself. If there's nobody that I can call, or you know what I mean, if there's even if I don't want to reach out, I can reach out. But before I reach out, I might also want to just try to validate myself first and see if that works, if that soothes me and calms me down, and if that feels right. So many times I've thought kind of what Becky was saying about how I thought it was conceited to validate myself. If I told myself I was awesome, then all of a sudden I was prideful. And that wasn't okay. And that was the worst thing in my book, was to be prideful. And I was trying to be humble. And so I would run from validation at all costs. But really, if I tell myself I'm awesome, or maybe I tell myself, okay, I did these 3 great things today, and that's all that I need for validation. I've also learned that it's not an excuse for me. Before we got on this call, before everybody joined, I was telling Ruby about an experience where I totally lost my cool with my kids today. One kid in particular where I just lost my temper with her. And so after she went to bed and I was thinking through everything, I was going through it, and I was validating myself, but I was also not excusing myself. I said, okay, Brittany, you lost your cool, and that wasn't okay. You lost your cool because of this, this, and this. And so I validated how hard my day was. I validated how hard my child was being. I did all sorts of validation, but I didn't excuse it. I didn't say, and so it's okay that you lost your cool. It's okay that you yelled at her. It's okay that you did this and that. I didn't excuse myself. I said, I validated, and then I used the word and I'm going to do better next time, because that's not okay what I did. So I love that aspect of validating myself, that I can validate and not be prideful. I can look at my strengths, and I can see what I do each day and see how awesome I am. And then I can also not excuse myself and not let myself run rampant with all sorts of yelling and losing my temper and all kinds of things.
I think that evidence of God's love for us is he's provided a world where we can get all of our needs met, where we can find food and water and shelter. And yet he gave us a way for us to seek validation. We can always go in prayer to get validation from a loving Heavenly Father. And if that wasn't enough, he's also left us with his word. We can go into the Bible, we can go into scripture and find validation there too. And so there's no reason we can't find validation if we're willing to do the step work to take care of ourselves.
Well, we're getting close to end time. Does anybody have any examples that they want Ruby to walk them through? Anything or any questions that they have for Ruby, or any examples?
All right, well, I just would add, I think I love how, Ruby, you put this together. I think it flowed really well. And validation, if it's really hard for you to validate self, knowing it's okay for it to be hard. And you can ask for help. And you can ask for help in prayer, and you can ask for help with friends, and until it feels more natural. But it is the most liberating feeling. And, validation is charity to self, and charity is pure love. And so if you even think of validation in different ways, I think it's really, it's amazing how liberating it is to validate self. So if it's hard for you, start listening to those podcasts. Do, Brittany's self-compassion workbook. All of that brings charity and love, and you're able to validate self more.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to add something. Can I do that? I've just been hiding back in the corner here, but Do you know, I had an upbringing that was pretty void of validation, and it didn't come natural to give it. I actually had no idea how to give validation. I only knew how to give sympathy, which was, oh, well, that sucks. At least it's not this, and at least it's not that. And it wasn't until I saw the video by Brené Brown on empathy versus sympathy that I realized that validation wasn't rescuing somebody from their pain. It was just climbing down in the hole with them and saying, I see you. This is hard. And that I realized I never had that. I never had anybody just say, I see this is hard. It was like your brother in the river. And it's like, you got this. Oh, you're fine. Oh, you have a life jacket. I mean, it was all that sympathy. And so it took surrounding myself with women who were naturally validating to teach me how to even do it. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, it may come hard. It may not be just a natural attribute to sit with somebody in their pain and just say, oh, I'm so sorry. Or to even sit with yourself. I couldn't even sit and validate myself because I thought it was pride, like Brittany. So I thought actually invalidating myself was humility. So I lived, a life of invalidating myself. And so it was such a process to even learn how to validate. And it's amazing when I saw your drama triangle to realize, oh, if we could realize that validation really is the key to get out of drama. It's like the secret sauce. It's like everybody needs to know this, but it starts with you. And it starts with looking at your upbringing. It really starts with looking at the relationships around you and the ones that are invalidating, really kind of separating yourself from, so you can learn how to validate yourself better.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing. I think if you're not used to validation, I think one of the reasons that we are scared to validate, I know my upbringing was because, well, if you validate, then you're not going to be a strict parent. If you validate, then your kids are going to walk all over you. I had an experience just last night where my youngest was supposed to go to bed. It was 8:30, but the older kids were watching a movie and they were able to stay up till midnight. And she came in and was just crying. She's like, I don't want to go to bed, but all my older brothers and sisters are staying up. And if I fell back to my upbringing, it would be like, well, I said this and you need to go to bed. And yet validating doesn't mean, okay, you're right. I see you're sad. You can stay up too. It was just simply saying, it must be really hard sometimes to be the youngest and to watch all the older ones get to stay up and have fun when you are supposed to go to bed. I bet that just feels hard. Tell me what that feels like. It's not fair, and it stinks. And I don't even get to watch what I want to watch because they always change the channel. And it's refraining from trying to make her feel better, because that's not my job. My job is not to make her feel better. I just said, that just sounds like that would be really hard. And come kiss me goodnight because you need to go to bed. Trudges over, gives me a half limp hug. I love you. Go to bed. Trudges out, So I still held the bedtime. I was still a strict parent, if that's what you want to call it, but I was also validating to her, and she knew she was seen. She knew she was understood. And I wasn't going to.
I would say boundaried parent.
Boundary. Yeah, boundaried. Yeah, there's that boundary. And I wasn't going to let her manipulate the boundary into staying up late.
That's a perfect example. Well, before we end, I guess I just want to tell you I think the first step in starting to learn validation is to stop and spend a few moments for yourself and think of what it would feel like to be validated. Think of a situation in your life where you weren't validated and rerun it in your mind as if you had been validated. So maybe it's a childhood memory where your mom ignored you, or you're I don't know, whatever it is. Think of a situation where you were not validated and how that made you feel, and then rewire it in your head to where if you had been validated, what would that feel like? When I do that, it almost brings me to tears because it feels so good to be heard and to be seen and to feel like somebody understood me. And that's all I wanted. As a kid, when situations happen, that's all I wanted, was somebody to validate me. And now that's the same thing. That's all I want. I don't need somebody to swoop in and control and fix things. I just want somebody to know that it's hard for me and to see that part. And so I encourage you to do that. Rewire a situation where you weren't validated and see how it would feel to be validated, and notice those feelings, and then sit with that for a minute, and then think of how you can do that for yourself in the future, and how you can do that for the people around you, whether that's your kids or your coworkers or strangers on Facebook, whatever it is. See how you can pass the validation around, because it feels so good. It feels so good to be validated. So thanks for joining us. I will hopefully get the slides from Ruby, and then I can email those. I have everybody's email, so I'll just email those out. It was fantastic, Ruby. You were so great. I loved the slides. They were great visuals for us, and I just thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
So glad. Okay, well, if anybody has any questions, you can just write it in the chat box. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a good Wednesday night. Ruby, you were awesome. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
That was